Hey out there, rock and rollers. Welcome to the 123rd episode of the Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock Podcast. Brought to you by me, your host, Mac B. the Wolf, and I will be joined as always by my partner in crime from the East Coast of the U.S., Gary Action Jackson. And for those of you who haven't been following along, I'm no longer in London. Yeah, I was in London for 3.5 years, just down the street from Abbey Road, but I had to move back to America. Little stint in the Netherlands in between there. But don't worry, our show is about bands who make it in the US and the UK, and sometimes certain bands make it one place, but they don't make it in the other. And we always like to explore why, the dichotomy of that. Why is it? Is because culturally they're not a fit? Is because their A&R man dropped the ball? Is because they were ahead of their time? Is before their time? One culture just didn't get it? Hard to know sometimes. And the band we're talking about today is a band that fits very neatly in the category of made it in the UK, had platinum and gold records and a very strong following, but is very much unknown to the average US rock fan. They may have a cult following here, but it hasn't ever grown greater than that, and that's Marillion. We're very much a prog-based band. And for the folks who have been listening to us, you know that Jax and I have gone through a very big prog phase over these last several years. For me, it's been around an 8 or 10 year journey here once I discovered Steve Hackett and his era of Genesis. I'm like, wow, that's really amazing stuff. Why wasn't that more popular? Why don't they play that on American radio? And prog sometimes has a hard time getting caught on. I think it's very English subgenre. I think you have to be pretty smart to understand it. Maybe not to appreciate the music, but sometimes the lyrics can be pretty heady, and it's not just AC/DC straight ahead kind of thing. So it's taken me a while to figure it out, to understand it. And when I was living in England, I wanted to get more into Marillion and understand them better. And 1983 saw their debut album, Script for a Jester's Tear, which to many is a masterpiece. At least it's a great way to kick off this incredible career they've had for 40 years plus, really now. And so to help us better understand this band and this album, we brought in an English musician, Jimmy Madden. He's kind of an independent artist, but he's growing all the time. He's got kind of a prog glam 70s thing going on where he's got the image, but he's also got the music to go along with it. He's a super guy. We met him a while back, and I know he's starting to grow in popularity here in America, so we thought, let's have him on, not only to promote his music and what he's up to, but to help educate Americans like us and a lot of our listeners who may not be that familiar with Marillion, may not be very familiar with this album. And maybe he can serve as a guide kind of to show us why this is valuable, why it made it in England, and maybe we can explore a little bit about why it never really took off in the U.S. as well. Now, before we get into that, we have to do a little bit of business here, and we always love to mention that we are proud members of the Pantheon Podcast Network, which has about 100 different shows, really all genres, something in there for everybody, and you can check out pantheonpodcast.com or follow them at Pantheon Pods. There's also an app where you can get all of the different podcasts and episodes on there. And we like to give shout outs to the folks who we've had onto our show, or maybe we've been on their show, like Jay from The Hook Rocks, like Christy Alexander Hallberg of Rock is Lit, Martin Popoff of History in 5 Songs, who I think we give a shout out on this episode, like our dear friend in England, Paul Stevenson of This Day Rocks and Vintage Rock Pod, like Tom and Zeus of the Shout It Out Loud cast, who are still knee deep in their Ultimate Kiss bracket for March Madness, and, of course, the CEO and co-founder of Pantheon Pods, Christian Swain of Rock and Roll Archaeology. And importantly, we have to give a shout out to our incredible sponsor, RareVinyl.com. Look, guys, I know there are a lot of record collectors, record buyers out there who love to have original stuff. LPs, of course, more popular than they've been in decades. Go to RareVinyl.com. They've got over 250,000 items in stock. They take great care of this stuff, and they ship it all around the world. I've met their team. They're brilliant. And I know that they have some great Marillion stuff. So if you're looking at a first edition Script for a Jester's Tear, or you're looking at some original, whether it's the Fish era, the Hogarth era, or even some of their solo albums, go to rarevinyl.com and use code PODCAST, PODCAST, and you can save 10% off your orders. They ship all around the world. So whatever you're looking for, go to rarevinyl.com or EIL.com, use code PODCAST, save yourself 10%, whether it's on that Marillion treasure that you've been looking for a long time. They have this amazing artwork that looks great on an LP. Rare Vinyl's got some of them, so go to rarevinyl.com, use code PODCAST, save yourself 10%. But back to Jimmy and to Marillion. I got to say that as a rock fan who listened to classic rock basically his whole life, never got anything from Marillion. They never played them on classic rock stations. I'm listening to these songs, some of which were into the charts in the UK. Had never heard them before listening to this album. Never saw their videos. They were never played on MTV back in the day. So as an American, I'm underexposed to this band, and I feel like a lot of other people are. And that's why we decided maybe step out of our comfort zone a little bit. It's like, well, we say we like prog, and we're experimenting more and listening to more of it. This is something we need to explore. This is something we need to know more about. And I'm glad we have a guide in Jimmy to kind of show us what its cultural significance is in England and why it's important, especially from a musician's standpoint. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get into it here. We're happy to welcome Jimmy Madden to teach us about Marillion's Script for a Jester's Tear as it turns 40, right here on The Wolf. We want to welcome here Jimmy Madden to the Ugly American Werewolf. Obviously, we've been to see some of your YouTube videos and things like that. You're definitely into prog, Jimmy, but it seems you got a little bit of that 70s English glam going on with your style there. You want to tell us a little bit about your musical origins and what you were influenced by?
Yeah, no, you bang on the money there. And particularly like the latest record I've just come out with, Jimmy Madden 2, was very much want to go down that sort of find like the album in between like T-Rex's Electric Warrior and then the Stones' Exile on Main Street, and I just think Exile on Main Street is one of the great underrated records, really. So that was, it was like trying to combine those two into it, which were, it was funny, it was recorded at like 4:00 in the morning in a studio built underneath like a football ground here in Sheffield, and it was snowing outside, where me and the producer in this little studio like sort of smoking cigarettes and shots of whiskeys. I'm trying to get what's in my head down, and he's just sort of trying to follow along. When we got there, the whole thing was recorded really quickly as well. We spent like 10-hour sessions in there. But and a lot of the music that I suppose I grew up listening to, I brought into that record. I really probably listened, it's a bit cliche, innit? But I really did sort of try and listen to everything growing up. I think probably was surrounded by sort of, the sophistication of like opera music early on. And then, my dad would have the, Clash records and Sex Pistol records, like, as well. So it would sort of be, anywhere across that sort of musical spectrum. My big band, I've spoken about this in so many interviews, and, I've got to be weary not to sort of just talk about them, but Queen were, like, and still is my number one. Whatever they did, like the musical Bible that I sort of follow, in sound. So there's a lot of, Queen, funny enough, weren't like a massive band like my household growing up. Then my parents liked them, but they weren't like me, who was just fucking obsessed like a nutter on it. And but they really became number one. And then I think as I was growing up, I started to delve into like the Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash. At one point, I wanted to be Johnny Cash. I had the quiff and everything, and brokering. In high school, there weren't very many 16-year-olds when I was at high school with Bro Cream in their hair, and
I'm sure not.
But so I think musically, it were a little bit of everything.
That sounds the record sounds pretty rock and roll. Smoking and drinking at 4:00 in the morning. It doesn't get better than that.
No, and it was funny. I think there's definitely a vibe that I was looking for, which was like that sort of Exile on Main Street, approach, and only trying to reenact that the best that we could in Sheffield in 2022, because I think it was sort of December time. We had to try and bring that in, and with these songs, a couple of the songs have been with me for a long time and being played on tours all around. So, for me, it was like, okay, how do I get back into the headspace when I was 18? I wrote this so we can get it on record. And that just seemed to be the easiest option.
Well, and you mentioned T-Rex. When I listened to your song, Do I Turn You On, that's kind of what immediately comes to mind right there. I'm like, yeah, this has definitely got a Mark Bolan T-Rex thing going on. There's guitar and piano on that. Do you play all the instruments on your record? Yeah,
I do. So, I think there's parts of like the drumming, I'll bring people in, the parts I can't do. Same with the piano, I can play enough of, I'm not musically trained in anything, but I can play enough of a piano to sort of write and have ideas on. But for the fiddly bits and stuff like that, I really usually at that point I get people in. I'll try it. My ego needs to be bruised first, and then I'll
So did you learn
gotcha.
just by hearing, like listening to records and then, going over the piano or whatever and trying to replicate that? Is that how you learn to play?
Well, for the most part, I sort of took up bass guitar lessons in primary school.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Really, but it doesn't attract enough women, the bass guitar.
That's true.
Yeah, I'd sack that one off for the electric guitar, and I did have lessons. Mate's dad, who was a competent musician, growing up, did give me lessons for about 6 months or a year. But then I was sort of quite determined on trying to do things my way that weren't the traditional way, and so
good for you.
I thought, well, I'll just go and take it from there. But I mean, I've always had a belief in music, and I'm sure someone's going to say that this is terrible advice, but I do believe you can be overtrained. I know some technically brilliant guitarists who just don't have any feel to their playing. And for me, I think there's a fine line between knowing what you're doing and knowing too much and then just being too analytical about. I think you need to keep, like when I go into the studio, I know how I want a solo to sound or a harmony, arrangement, because I love building those orchestral harmonies with the guitar, like building up string lines and horn lines, but using my guitar and making that the ensemble and trying to see how far I can take one guitar. So I've got an idea of how they're going to sound, and I might write out a few movements, but for the most part, I kind of like to get in there and to feel the song in the moment and then lay that down, because I think that you never know in the studio how a song's actually going to come out until it's been done.
Sure.
You can think it's going to be a slow ballad, and then it evolves and gets a life of its own, and the bass line gets bouncing, the drums get bouncier, and it's this upbeat, near disco record, So I think if you try and think too much before you've actually played it, I think you do yourself out some good ideas.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you there. I think you can be too clinical. There's nothing wrong with training. There's nothing wrong with study and trying to be amazing at your instrument. But just because you lay something down that's technically amazing doesn't mean it has any life or breath to it. I feel like it's the same thing with sports. You could be very technically gifted, but sometimes you need a little street ball in you to really get the point across, right? Yeah. And you mentioned Queen. Love Symphony No. 1. Besides your logo, which is obviously somewhat inspired by theirs, I thought Love Symphony No. 1 had a little bit of that Queenness to it with some of the time signature changes and the going from one tempo to the other. There was that kind of what you were going for there.
That was definitely to scratch an itch, that record. It were the original start of the second album, that record, and then lockdown came, and that song we just realized that. And I was flying, that was recorded in Australia as well, and I was flying out of Australia not long sort of before that record finished, and we're in and out of lockdowns, and all those vocal harmonies had to be thrown on in, we'll get like a 2-hour window, and then I'll be recording, and the producer, Peter B, who would come over the cans and say, right, you got to get as much down as you can in the next 45 minutes, because they just announced a lockdown that's happening at 7 tonight. So I'll be in the vocal booth thinking, shit, and start throwing just as many vocal takes and guitar things as I could. And I knew I wouldn't be around to mix it, because I knew I was going to be out of the country.
Right.
I sort of just finished it, really. Maybe a good thing, because it's already over the top as it is. I don't know if I needed any more time on it. And then left it with Peter to completely mix, master, work out what the hell to do with. There's about 400 vocal and guitar, tracks in there, and he's trying to piece them all together.
Wow.
And I like this idea of not repeating the same harmony balance twice. So if you got like a 3-part harmony in A, instead of going in a certain order on the next one, and maybe the same notes, but they're going in a slightly different order just to change up the sound. So he's got these bits of vocals everywhere, and funny enough, I didn't think he was actually going to do it, and I got an email one day saying, right, here's that song, and I was very happy with it. But I think that was to sort of scratch an itch of like, I can go over I can do these slight operatic ideas and pouncing about in the studio. And then there was an element with some of the other tracks I'd done, like Make Love, that I did here, which was the polar opposite, to show that I can also do a straightforward sort of one-take rock and roll number with there's still harmonies on that record, but they're minimal. And that was to sort of show the contrasting styles of, I can do this over-the-top big arrangement ballad, and then I can also still strip it back to sort of show that I don't just hide behind all of the techniques of multi-layering. You still can have that just me sound, which this last record actually has the whole way through.
Yeah, your Talk Dirty to Me song I dig, and that's very straight ahead rock. Yeah, it's right in your face, good riffs, good come on, here we go kind of thing. Love that one, man.
Yeah, and that was really what led me to okay, let's just do another album. I had very rarely do I think of my own tracks, well, this is good, but I remember playing that one, I thought, that's good, actually. And I could hear the drum, the sort of parts of the drums in my head, and I thought, gee, I don't want to release that and have nothing to follow up with it. And then really a bit of an opportunity came about to do this album in this short time frame that we had. So it was try and take as much of that sound. I mean, there's still a song on the new album that's it's a waltz, and it's me on the piano going like a bum 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 bum. Because why not? Rock and roll album, why not have a waltz in there? And so there's still there's sophistication within amongst the sort of gritty rock and roll. That where it comes from, I'm not too sure.
Yeah, no, that's great, and that's very prog, right? It's experimental. It doesn't all sound like one thing, and it can move from the spectrums of maybe something heavy and dark to something very light and cheery, maybe even comical if you want. It's it's your call. So, and
it's funny, I mean, Do You Feel, which is the latest single that came off, the origins of that. I mean, I've seen lots of reviews in magazines about it that are saying it's a bluesy sort of riff and it's a sort of slow end bluesy track. I mean, it's funny, the whole thing come from disco, that records that I was listening to at the time. Everyone's completely sort of missed the point with that. It's the big bass lines are just strumming down the frets. It's sort of very 1970s Boney M chick disco stuff that I would listen to. And that's where that record comes from. So, I mean, the whole album's got elements of operatic waltzes and hard in your face rock and roll to these disco sort of beats and stuff that I was listening to at the time. So, but I do think I agree with what you say about it being progressive and always different. I think you have to always be doing something different, not fully reinventing yourself, but each track needs to stand strong and alone into the album, but immediately let people know you never quite know what sound you're going to get, and just keep it interesting for the listener. You know what I mean? When you listen to an album, you need those ebbs and flows, and I think the one thing that gets missed, I think these days, just singles being so fashionable, is that they miss the ebb and flow of the creation of music.
Well, that's always our kind of our mantra here on this show, is that we are album rock fans, and that's what you're supposed to do, is listen to the whole thing. Because you're right, the single, while it may be great to stand on its own, you want to listen to it in the context of the whole album, because you, as the artist, put it together that way for me to listen to, like you said, track by track the whole way through.
Yeah, and it's interesting. When I write a song, I don't really write the singles. I don't like writing individual songs, because if you try and write a single, you're so focused on, is it catchy? Is there a hook? Is there enough bass?
Right.
Is the drums right? Where when you take all of that out of the equation, you just record a pure song, 8, 9, 10 of them. The strongest songs stand out. The singles leap out to you. And I think the songs are stronger nowadays. Such this sort of today's hit, tomorrow's fish and chip paper type mentality of you get a new track and where if you look at the singles that came out in the day, they were sitting in the charts for months and months and months and months and months, because I think the tracks were stronger. They weren't like, yeah, this is catchy, this is good, but there's no substance to it.
I'm with you there.
Bar a few acts, before someone comes along and says, yeah, but we'll have these bands. There are bands like that who are doing good stuff, but I think a lot of the pop hits have such a short shelf life, because it is just about pump out a good riff and then move on to the next one.
That's right. Yep, you're right, man. And so we're with you there, and we're album guys and guys for artists and bands who have something to say.
Hi, this is Steve Hackett, and you're listening to the Ugly American Werewolf in London.
But we want to talk a little bit about Marillion now. And a lot about our show is because I was an American expat until recently. I was living in London and loving to be in all these kind of hallowed grounds, all these places where all this amazing rock and roll has been made over the decades. But our show is also about the dichotomy of why some bands might be big in the US, but they never quite catch on in the UK. And then vice versa. Maybe you're big in the UK and Europe, but for whatever reason, they don't really catch hold in America. And Marillion is one of those bands of the latter sort, right? They're well known in the UK. They've had platinum records. They have a strong fan base around Europe as well. But most people in America don't even know who they are. It's not like, oh yeah, they had that one song whenever. They don't even have that. No one here knows Kaylee. No one here knows, he knows, no one knows who's this bald guy singing who sounds like Peter Gabriel. It's like, no, that's Fish, and he's actually pretty damn good. Like, they literally don't know. Like, I think the script for A Jester's Tear, Jimmy, I know it kind of came out before you were born. It went to like number 7 in the charts in the UK. It went to number 175 in the US. Like, no airplay whatsoever. What's your experience with Marillion growing up? I mean, was it something you would occasionally hear on certain radio stations, or were friends into it, or did you have to grow up and kind of discover it on your own?
No, funnily enough, my dad was a massive Marillion fan around that era where the band came out, and he was like a younger student age, so it was that perfect time. So he was just a fan, particularly the Fish era band, or Fish era Marillion. So he was a fan who would just go and see him, when he could probably go and get a ticket for like £1.
Right.
And he used to go and see him at the town hall in Newcastle upon Tyne, up in the northeast of England. And, so for me growing up, it was just a band of records that he had and kept buying. And he would listen to them in the car when I was growing up, it'd be one of those records. So likewise, I became a fan of theirs by extension.
Sure.
But it's similar to your experiences. For my age group growing up, very few people knew who they were.
Mm-hmm.
They're a funny one where, as I've gotten older, met more musical people. They're like, yeah, you're right, they are a brilliant band, you know what I mean? Or people are very familiar with the current Marillion, the Hogarth era. So, yeah, for me, I definitely think they're a wonderfully underrated band.
Well, and I think the era in which they came up kind of contributed to them being less popular, at least in the US, maybe. Because in 1983, when the script for A Jester's Tear comes out, and we had Carl Palmer of ELP in Asia on the show. He's like, in the 70s, it was brilliant. You could get anything on the radio in America. It was awesome. You want to put a 10-minute waltz on there. Like, they'll play it. American DJs will play it. And he's like, as soon as we formed Asia, the record company's like, nope, you can't do that stuff anymore. None of that long, extended stuff. You have to be pop. It has to come in like 4 minutes or whatever. And that's why he wasn't in Emerson, Lake and Palmer anymore. He was in Asia, and yes, weren't doing Tales for Topographic Oceans anymore. They were doing Owner of a Lonely Heart, so they had kind of had to switch. Genesis was not even close to the same band in 1983 as they were in like 1976, right? So, but like our buddy Martin Popoff, who is he has a show on the network we're on, Pantheon, and he's written over 100 books, one of which was on Marillion. And he kind of credits Marillion because like Marillion did get the memo that you have to be punk and then you have to be new wave. They're like, no, we still love this amazing music that people like Genesis and Camel and people like that make. So we're just going forward with that. He kind of gives them credit for bringing on the second wave of prog and helping give second life to those bands who kind of had to make a shift in the 80s with the times. Do you have a favorite era? I mean, I know you say you love the Fish era, and I think everybody tends to love the Fish. Nothing against Hogarth. he's amazing on his own. But, I mean, what is it about the Fish era and their kind of start out that you think resonates with you and other people?
I really, and I think it's probably one reason why they maybe didn't quite work in the States. Only just to touch on a point you made about music in the 70s, I did really listen to the album about an hour ago before we came on, just to refresh myself, and I thought this album would not be out of place in 1973.
Exactly.
But I think one reason that I love them and a lot of people love them, maybe the Americans they didn't quite understand, is there's something beautifully British about that. There's a British catness to the sort of pantomime style, big costumes and all the makeup and the exotic sort of, that almost sort of Spinal Tap style stage show that they used to do.
Right.
Was that there is a very British element to that early albums that they were doing that wouldn't be got by every. I don't know how successful they were even in parts like Australia and stuff like that in the 80s, but I love them for that. It's very theatrical. It's sort of lyrically kind of, how would you say, Lord of the Rings-esque, some of the lyrics that came up. I mean, like Script for a Jester's Tear has just some beautifully written, almost poetry-like lines in it, captivated by some great chord changes and key changes and tempo changes, and whether it was just a bit too And it's hard to pinpoint exactly what this metric is, but whether it was just a bit too British, you know, to be kind of understood, because I think you always have to be in that world to get, you know what I mean? Because I couldn't tell you what makes it that British bit, but there's something about it that, you know, lots of British actors and comedians and musicians actually have all suffered from.
You're right. No, sorry, I'll let you jump in here in just 1 second, Jack. But I must say, we've always said on the show over the years, prog is a very British subgenre of music. It's not that we don't have people who can make these chord changes and write these kind of often fantastical lyrics and things like that. But, you know, Selling England by the Pound by Genesis is brilliant. But there's a lot of like little things in the lyrics and things like that. You kind of do have to be British, maybe even live through that time to really understand them. So I think you're right there. Also, I think his lyrics are, for lack of a better word, too smart for the average American. You know, it's not AC/DC, you know, it's Long Way to the Top. Oh yeah, I get that, man. It's, you know, when you're talking about these kind of things in a poetic way, like, he says, what the hell is he talking about? You know, they can't catch on.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's dense. You have to sit there and really listen and kind of go through the entire album, listen to what he's saying. There's a lot going on there. I think there are themes that maybe in America we have, but they're not as present, like in Garden Party, you know, when they talk about, it's kind of about the elite, you know, snob culture, people being better than other people. We have that here, but it's not as prevalent. And I was going to say too, in 1983, we had what Twisted Sister came out with, I Want to Rock, dun, 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 dun. That's what we do in the United States.
Right.
It's pretty straightforward.
No, and, you know, it's funny, of that music out of England in the 80s, there wasn't really that sort of straightforward rock that, you know, and again, I didn't live through the 80s in England. I was born, you know, but from the music I've picked up and inherited, is England didn't really have that. There's a little bit of it in the early 70s with the punk scene, but even if you go back and listen to like Nevermind the Bollocks, there's quite a lot of musical validity there that I don't think people realize. It's not just, you know, as someone who loves the Ramones, it's not just that simple G-A-D downstrum punk music. I think whilst punk in England was a political movement in the 70s, punk as a musical movement came out of New York. I would feel that a lot of people associate punk, the birth of punk, being England, and it were, but it's much more a political movement than in England in the 70s. It was that political movement of England on its knees, and you know, coming out the aftermath of the wars and the economy, and then in the north the roll into the Thatcher years. Where I think in America it was much more your punk because there was a rebellion of yourself against what society was expecting. Well, I think here we'll fight the government with it.
Yeah, we definitely have a different set of circumstances in the United States. Yeah, it was more just people wanted to hear loud, fast music and not so much a statement against what was going on. We didn't really have the same problems in the United States.
Yeah, you know, and it's funny if you look at like a Chelsea Monday off the Marillion record, which I love. And funny side topic, that record, there's a lot of that song in one of the songs off my first album, which was Outside, which I love the little conversational bit at the end. So there's a thing like that in that record. And there was an idea of the extended guitar solo as well that came off. There was a lot of Chelsea Monday that went, oh man, I got to have that. But, you know, again, it comes out that big sort of progressive guitar solo bit that rolls over. And then it goes from hard guitars to an acoustic guitar fingerpick before it kicks back in. You know, and that was very British of that time as well. You know, it's on a lot of early Queen records where it transitions from electric guitar to acoustic, even with one guitarist. So those sort of transitions were not something that you're probably hearing in America. And I'm sure it's probably a sense of that people enjoyed the musical validity of it. You know, there's a lot of moving parts to it, you know, and I have seen videos of them doing it live, and credit to them, because I know a lot of my own stuff is very hard live. But whether that, again, it comes down to that British sort of pantomime style show, whether that would have been understood. And as you guys said, in that era in America, it was that, you know, harder and rock and roll.
Yeah, riff based, pretty simple, straightforward. You know, you have riff, chorus, little bit in the middle, the bridge back to the chorus, and then on the out, we didn't have a whole lot of changes, and there was nothing on the radio that was 8.5 minutes.
Yeah.
No, and it's funny, even when as a Motley Crue fan, when you think that Nikki Sixx is openly admitted to loving Queen and those early 70s stuff, the bands like Marillion, these British bands from the 70s are doing this stuff. When push came to shove and his band comes out, Motley Crue's first record is released. You know what I mean? If you listen to that first Motley Crue album and then went, oh, by the way, one of his favourite albums is Night at the Opera. You wouldn't put that together from that connection. But even ingrained in the American who were listening to it weren't attempting that. Their glam rock was a much different vision to what it were here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of glam, I mean, the cover art on Script for a Jester's Tear done by Mark Wilkinson, and then he went ahead and did, most of them throughout the 80s. He certainly did Fugazi, which I think came next. He did Misplaced Childhood and all all that stuff. It's very vivid. It's usually very colorful. It's realistic, and yet it's all cartoonish at the same time. Don't you think this had something to do with setting up how people saw Marillion? Just like at the same time, Iron Maiden's got Eddie on their album covers, which sets the tone and gives you a certain, I can't wait to see what their next album cover looks like. That's part of the experience. That was part of Marillion as well, right?
Yeah, no, it very much so. It's almost a piece of art, that album cover. In an era where album covers were pieces of art,
right.
Thought went into album covers because it were a physical means. Now it's on screen. But I had a lot of conversation with my dad about how brilliant that album cover is, and then when my first record coming out, it was very much you're going to do something like that, are you? But no, you're right. That whether I don't know if that's what caught his eye originally, or whether it was just one of those, you go out and see who was playing locally, and if they're good, you stayed. If they're no good, you went, sort of thing. But I know that album cover has been definitely a topic of conversation in terms of the cover alone is a conversation without me touching on the music. But you're right, it ties into the music and the cover go hand in hand. Perfect.
Now, the only problem is it doesn't necessarily translate to the real world, because I know there's a couple of clips of Fish wearing a suit that's in that pattern of the Jester's pants, and it's out there. It is very out there.
Yeah, and I think that's always what's hard about these sort of productions. You make these mammoth albums, and then you have to tour it on the road. Pink Floyd, that's been I remember seeing sort of Roger Waters doing the War tour and how they rebuilt the wall.
Right.
And that's one of the only times I can think of taking a concept album and actually being able to do it live on stage, and maybe it only works they were just putting blocks up. So I think these albums, it's one of those, I've always got a big belief in that an album's an album, a live show's a live show. I don't want to go and see a band play the album exactly like the record. If I want that, I'll listen to the record. I want the live show to be a live performance of the record. Because you can do things on an album you can't do live. As technically brilliant as a band plays it note for note, I don't want to see, I'm not going to pay 200 quid to go and see that. I want to see a live rendition. I do think that they did that quite well in trying to capture the essence of it as close as they could. With probably understanding that they were a band from the north of England that, sort of fell into this short era of success that ultimately, was that incarnation was short-lived. It was a shame it was so short, really, because you probably wonder what they could have gone down. But then the 90s came along, and you Yanks, particularly out of Seattle, completely rewrote the rules on music, in the early 90s.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny that the 90s punk scene, that 90s punk scene was just the absolute opposite of what was happening in the 80s. These grandiose album covers and massive stage shows and long-winded guitar solos and massive hair. Everything was so much bigger. It was like at some point someone's just going to come along and go, let's just remove all of that. Mm-hmm. And I do like that sort of music of the 90s. It is a nice sort of transitional point, but it killed a lot of bands dead. What I mean? Yeah. It was one of those rare musical moments in history where if you didn't get with it, you would just stop. Possibly, I think the 50s, that era, that birthplace of rock and roll, changed that history as well. You know, you couldn't be in a jazz band by 1952. Everyone was having to get with what Sun Studios was doing out of Memphis. And I think that's in the 90s was the same. As soon as Nirvana came along, it rewrote the rules. And if you were still going, again, Motley Crue, for example, you still try and go out there and do it like you were in 1988.
Yeah.
People just didn't want to do it, you know.
It's what archaeologists would call a mass extinction event, basically. You know, right?
Yeah. No, 100%.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's jump in. Let's start to go track by track a little bit. And look, you know, for folks who are not familiar with Marillion, this is like a 46, 47-minute record, but there's only 6 songs on the record. I mean, basically all of them, except for He Knows You Know, are like 8 minutes long, you know. So you kind of have to strap in. And there is a little bit of they can be operatic. They certainly have some time changes and things like that, like we've talked about on some of the other prog records we've done over the years, certainly some Genesis stuff. But you start with the title track, Script for a Jester's Tear. And I give them credit. They do give writing credit to generally everybody in the band. Everybody, they kind of share their writing there, where it seems that Fish is the one coming up with all the lyrics. But this is one of a lament, I would call it, about love lost on a playground of broken hearts. And he's kind of telling the story of the jester, right? The guy who has to smile and carry on anyway, even though his heart is broken. What stands out for you on this one, Jimmy?
I tell you, you know, I think it's such a, in terms of an album's opening album track, that initial beginning is daunting, and you're right, it sets the scene of the going over the top. But one of my favourite parts in it is that end where it rolls back around at the end, and you've got the sort of big open power chords and the synthesizer running along, and it's just so, it's powerful. It's a powerful music. You can just listen to that alone, and it is, you know, the big drum fills. And when you go from what was at the beginning of the track to get into that point, it's brilliant. But I think lyrically, it's brilliant. That's absolutely fantastic song name.
It is
just brilliant. But lyrically, I think it's one of some of their best, because it's just got so much going on, so well crafted. Particularly the middle section as well. You know, it's probably one of those songs that you can slice into at any point in time, and it could be a standalone song. You know, there's no point that you could slice in and think, you know, what is this? It's in that Bohemian Rhapsody way that it's multiple songs within one.
Yeah, what do you say, Jackson? I mean, look, it becomes epic at some point. At about the 2:30, 2:35 mark, there's some really sweet guitar work from Rothery after, you know, Fish is going over and over and over. And then there's also a gear change to acoustic about halfway through, or at least it sounds acoustic. It's probably just stepping on a pedal or something like that. But it gets symphonic, you know, through here. I mean, what's your take on this one, Jackson?
Well, what I thought on this one is I was trying to remember how this band was thought of in my life, and it was always the Genesis kind of ripoff. That's what it was billed as. I mean, I never really listened to it as a kid, but listening to this track, I mean, Fish has a great voice, but it really sounds like Peter Gabriel. Like if you didn't know anything about it, you'd say, "Oh, that's Genesis." So I think that's where a lot of the maybe apprehension in the United States was, because it did sound like they were trying to sound like them, even though their themes are different. What they're writing about is different than Genesis tackled. It's really hard to get over that, because it sounds so similar to me.
Well, what, 83, Genesis didn't sound like Genesis anymore, right? The Peter Gabriel era of Genesis was old school, was old hats. Like, we don't want to listen to that anymore, if they ever wanted to in America. Because again, it was a little heady for them. It's not, you know, straight ahead rock and roll.
Right.
But you know, I like this one, and I think the music is great. The lyrics, it takes you a little while to wrap your head around it. Mm-hmm. You have to read them, you have to hear them, you have to think about it. You're probably not going to get the whole theme on the first listen. It's going to take a little while for that to sink in or for you to understand. But the music comes through very well, I think. And, you know, this is a band that was very They had a very steady and solid lineup. I mean, Fish did leave at the end of the 80s, right? And Mick Pointer was their original drummer. He was on this record, but then he was replaced by Ian Mosley on the next one, and then Mosley never left. And Mark Kelly has always been on the keyboards, and Rothery has always been their guitar player. And Pete Trewavas is very good bass player, and he's always been on. So, it's like all the musicianship has not only been, heightened and very good, but they've kind of always been able to work together. And that's also a sign of, I don't know, it's great to see. I know a lot of bands have a lot of different lineup changes. It's good to know that they can work together, but it must show a mutual respect and understanding of what everyone's going to want to do if they could stay together that long.
Yeah, and I think, when you think about the era it was recorded in, it was not the era now of digital recording where you can drop the click tracks in and the tempo clicks and copy and paste things in. It were on tape, having to be played live. So you're right, they had to be tight because there were some of the modern recording techniques by that early age, but, you still really, it's not like it is, and a record like that would be so much easier to do now. You could probably do it in your bedroom.
Yeah,
probably doing the bedroom without having any instruments.
Yeah,
but
true.
For them to do it, you're right. I think there was a real size, but a real sort of vision of the band was united. And I think on a record like this or a song like that, even you've got everyone needs to be on the same page of what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and that first one, it's not hard, it's not heavy, but it is pretty proggy, and it's got some nice tones in it. Pretty bits in it, if you will. And I thought it was it is an interesting way to start the record. Now we go on to He Knows You Know, which is their second single off of the album. And there was a video for it. I went back and found it after I watched you on YouTube. I went and looked at the video, which is, it's a little intense. I mean, the song itself is about drug use, I think specifically heroin, and what you go through fighting it and trying to hide it from your friends, and then they're trying to help you, and you don't want to know because you're still in the thralls of this. Actually went into 35 on the UK chart. It didn't chart in America. Back with charting the single, which was one of their non-album songs that they weren't, because in the early 80s they had a few singles that were non-album singles, and I think that was one, and then they turned it into a B-side. But if you were watching MTV, and I'm fairly certain they never played this on MTV back in the day in America. I guess you could have maybe seen it on Top of the Pops if it got to 35 and they showed it. But I'm also guessing they didn't even do that. I don't know. To me, this is very interesting as a single. But I like Rothery's guitar because he doesn't overplay on it. He seems to know exactly what to play and what not to play. But again, to me, he sounds very much like old Peter Gabriel in this, which is not necessarily his fault because his voice sounds a certain way. But when he's going like, you got that kind of part in there, I'm like, that could be very PG. I don't know. What do you think about this one, Jimmy?
It's funny because actually when I was listening back to this recently, this song, I remember thinking that it was an obvious single for mine because with the benefit of hindsight, I think it's a song that's well ahead of its time. Mm-hmm. The dancey bass sort of movement or textures that are in there. A couple of years later, you got Thriller coming out, Set the World on a Storm. And I think when you listen to that, it's like bum, 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 sort of, mm-hmm. It's got that very. If it come out 5 years later or 3-4 years later, I think it would have probably done a lot better than it did. I dare say it's one of those numbers you could chalk up to ahead of its time, or people not quite ready for it. But then maybe with that sort of Marillion-esque, maybe this is the Marillion's version of a dance track. Maybe it would have sounded the same, But I definitely think that there's there's a lot of things happening in there where you go. Yeah, she's quite early. I mean, you remember it's 1983. It does seem a lot earlier.
Absolutely. And then in the video, they kind of show Fish with his hair parted over and slicked down, like he's a citizen, like he's not the super weirdo rock star with the makeup and the outfits and all that, like he likes to do on stage there, But then they also show him kind of in the padded room, like, we need to lock him up here. And then to kind of give the American juxtaposition, not too long before this album comes out, an album called Metal Health by Quiet Riot comes out, which is probably best known for their Slade cover, Come On, Feel the Noise. But yeah, Metal Health, they show him in a padded room. And so there's a little dichotomy between the UK and the US right there. In the UK, you're telling a story of, all right, this guy who's having problems and he's not listening to his friends. He's trying to make it through. And the Americans are just like, yeah, they're trying to keep me from partying, but they can't stop me. Mental health. Like that's the difference. Right, Jackson?
Yeah. And when I saw they had a video for this, it's the same thing. I'm like, I got to check this out. And I was a little nervous, but it fit time. Like it had the story, it had the costume changes, it had the 80s ladies with the way too much makeup and hairspray in the office. But yeah, it looked like it fit in with the other concept videos at the time. And yeah, this is kind of a heavy duty message for rock and roll in 1983 of like you said, you're trying to hide this problem that you're having that's affecting your life, and you're going to end up in a bad way. There's no way around it. And I think did he have substance abuse problems, or did he know somebody? It seemed like it was pretty personal.
I honestly don't know. I know he's in good shape now, but I don't know about that for him personally. But I mean, at about the 2.5 minute part, Mark Kelly's keys come in, and it's like, wow, now this is really good. And then Rothery comes in with this soaring guitar, and usually the keys and the guitar are like fighting over that kind of mid-range, versus the bass or the high-end vocals. But it seems like they share that mid-range really well. They kind of can weave in together, and that's why I'm starting to like this band. It may take a minute to get the lyrics, to understand what they mean. And yeah, sometimes, Jackson, like on this song, the lyrics are pretty heavy. Yeah. But you can appreciate the musicianship, and that's what I think a lot of Americans are missing out on by not knowing who like Mark Kelly and Steve Rothery are, to me.
Do you think the problem with bands who become big in England and then struggle to break it in America, I know Mark Bolan never quite broke America with T-Rex, where massive here.
Right.
Marillion, there's a handful. Do you think the problem becomes that these bands become so big here, they then try to adapt the sound too much to fit? Like if America doesn't get something like He Knows You Know, they try and reinvent the sound to what we think that you guys were like, alienate our fan base here.
Right.
And then, but not like we get stuck in no man's land because we're then trying too much to adapt to what you guys do without your cultural references to understand it.
I think you're onto something there. I mean, a lot of it has to do with just timing. I always blame the A&R man. Like if somebody's brilliant in England and for whatever reason they don't come over here or they don't make it quite as big, I'm like, the A&R man didn't get it. I mean, it doesn't even have to be something like prog. Like we had Gary Kemp on, obviously of Spandau Ballet fame. He has 24 hits in UK and Europe and around the world. In America, it's True, and that's it. And his second one was like when PM Dawn basically sampled his hit, and then he had a second run of that, like I remember I saw a documentary on those guys that was on BBC, and they have the song Gold on, and I'm like, well, this is a pretty good song. This should be a hit. Like it was a hit. It just wasn't a hit in America. Because I'm like, yeah, I'm 47 and I've never heard this song before. Yet if I lived over there the whole time, my whole life, I would have heard it a lot, So you're right. And it's always bad to try to chase something, especially to chase it if it's not of you, whether you're trying to chase a hit because the style has changed, or you're like, oh, we want to make it in America. Let's sing about hot rods and chicks, when you're usually talking about something a little heavier. If it's not endemic or very much of you, that doesn't work for you musically. You're right, it can alienate the fans you've already made. So, yeah, I think you're onto something. You think he's right on that score, Jackson?
I was going to say, or even the perception of that, because, the Def Leppard album, Pyromania, was huge in the United States, but in England, it was what are you too good for us now? You're trying to be an American band? Get out of my face. And so they got the shaft at that point in time. Obviously they came back and were huge in Europe also. But yeah, that perception of you're trying to be someone you're not, you're trying to play to an audience that's not your home audience, go away.
And I think that is a big thing here. If a band starts to sound American, like there's if you're a band from the north here, you say there's slang like "oh" and "no" for anything and nothing, and obviously they're quite rhythmic words, so you hear them pop up in lyrics a lot, and suddenly if you hear them disappear, people go, "hang on a tick, where's your Yorkshire slang gone?" And particularly like you hear when people doing interviews in the States, and you suddenly go, it's different, so changing up the sound there. So I don't know if it's the same American bands who try and come over here and break it, but there's certainly a sense of, because America's still now today the mecca of music. It's where I'm trying to break, and I've been lucky to have had success with America, but it's still where I could have a number one here tomorrow, but I'll still be thinking, I like a number one in America. So even for us still today, America's still the place that you're chasing in music.
Yeah, and I think, part of why Oasis is so beloved in England is because they weren't trying to kowtow to America. Like, they kind of flipped off America, like, screw you. You like us, great. Come to our shows, buy our records. You don't, we don't fucking care. We're going to do our own thing. Also, they kind of came out in America, kind of right after grunge had ebbed and then kind of flowed out. And then people in America were like, okay, we don't want this aggressive rock. We need like Hootie and the Blowfish. We need something nice and happy. And they sell 25 million copies of that record, right? Because we don't, we invested in Nirvana, but he died. We invested in Alice in Chains, but he died. We but they died. And it's like, okay, we don't want to do that. Whereas Cool Britannia was going on in the UK with a lot of bands that Oasis may be at the forefront, but there's a lot of that kind of going on with like, we don't need to be just like America, because that was the 80s, was like Margaret Thatcher and Reagan were waltzing together, right? It was always the two of us together, and we're like, we don't want that anymore. We want to be our new generation. And that really caught on in Britain, and I think America was kind of doing its own thing. So, I mean, I feel like your bands, especially in that era, were great and benefited from not trying to make it in America. Even if it happened, okay, that's great, but they're not like, please, Mr. A&R man, please tell me which single is good. I'll change it, so it'll get on the radio.
And it's funny, in the early 2000s when the Strokes blew up, that everyone weren't trying to be the Strokes, but there's that sound that turned into that sort of indie Britpop sound of like the early Arctic Monkeys and the Kooks and stuff like that. It was one of those, again, they weren't trying to take the American sound, because no one sounds like the Strokes but the Strokes. It doesn't matter how well you try and do it. They're just one of those bands. And their sound blew up here, and then England sort of took that sound and became very proud of that British Britpop indie stuff that came out of that time. It was very much like it may have had its origins out of America, but it's ours now. Like, this version is ours, and we're not going to give it up.
Well, you were talking too about the grunge, and that was only a very small section of time that it was popular. But I think the thing is, even though it was a refreshing change, and people like that, people want rock stars. They want to see not people that look like homeless people that are like, well, we don't really care
right.
about. No, you want Motley Crue. We got into a fight at the strip club last night. I crashed my car. And I think that was kind of Oasis too. Like they were that next band that came out and were like, yeah, I love being a rock star. I love partying. I love doing whatever I want to do, giving people the finger, fighting. And that's just what we want. That's what rock and roll is supposed to be. And in a weird way, Marillion is kind of like that, because they did their own thing and they had the big stage production. And to your point before, Jimmy, you don't want to see the record done exactly the same. You want to see, I paid money for this. I want to see a show. Give me not just play the music, give me a show also that I can
performance.
See. Correct. Yeah. Yes. And appreciate.
I think England's always had that big performance side of, Bowie early on, what he was doing. England's always been very much a theatrical performance style type of musician. You know, the irony is Oasis, who just stood there, were sort of, you know, opposite of what, and that was kind of their statement. But you know, traditionally, particularly in the 70s, 80s, and stuff like that, in England, it was you're a performer, you're outrageous and camp and a bit daft, and with that sort of, as I said, Britishness in you that, you know, the Marillion certainly had, and I think that's why they were so. Again, and I touched on before, I think it's why it's so big here in that phase is musical validity. Like, the music is good. You can't. They're not hiding behind the pyrotechnics and album covers. Like, the music's good. You can just listen to the music, but they had that. There's a sense of you're watching something that you weren't going to go watch anywhere else.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Amanda Lehman, and you're listening to Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock Podcast.
Well, and speaking of music, we better get to the next song, or you know, it's going to take, this is going to be a 3-hour episode here. So, but the third song and the final song on the first side, The Web, Don't Give Me Your Problems. I really like this one. I think that, you know, they kind of start off soft with the acoustic, at least acoustic-like guitar from Rothery, and I think it's probably overall his best guitar work on the album. But it's based on the kind of the Greek myth of the Shroud of Laertes. For those who weren't classically educated, you know, it's like Penelope's waiting for Odysseus to come back from Troy, you know, after the Trojan War. It takes him 20 years, and she's got all these suitors. She's like, okay, well, as soon as I finish this shroud, I will make my decision. So she would knit it, create it all day, and then at night she would pull it apart because she's still waiting for Odysseus. I love Greek mythology and Roman mythology. I think it's great storytelling, and obviously it translates to kind of every language. But you can see there's a difference here between, again, an album that came out the exact same year, maybe right before it, Peace of Mind, had Flight of Icarus. Also a classic story, a classic tale, but it's about death, and it's obviously Iron Maiden puts their style on it here. But I don't know, this one really stands out on the album to me. Let's let Jackson go first this time. What stands out on the Web for you?
Well, it's the last song of the first side of the record. I think here is where we kind of run into a problem in the United States audience, because we're looking for that riff. We're looking for the power chords, and this is it's almost like a continuation. Like it doesn't jump out to you right off the bat. You have to listen to it a couple of times, and then you start to see the differences in between. So it's dense. I do agree with you. I like the story of it. I like that there's a little more behind this deal, and the music it's good, but it's really, now you're really kind of working to get into this, and I think you'll be rewarded. I just think we had a hard time getting to that point.
Yeah, I mean, it's 9 minutes, right, Jimmy? I mean, it's not everybody can listen to a 9-minute epic.
No, you know, reminds me of the first time Led Zeppelin played Stairway to Heaven and people were walking out to go get another drink, you know.
Right. That's not a whole lot of love. What the hell?
Yeah, you know, and people it were, okay, a 9-minute song is always a risky one, you know. But I think ties in perfectly as an ender for that first side, you know, with the big phone slam down, and I think when you're building an album, the middle part of it's the most important, because beginning's easy, you start hard and, you know, give them what you want, and the ending's the same. It's like a concert, you end on the big number. It's the middle ones, and this is a perfectly, really, it's taken 2, maybe 3 middle songs and turn them into one,
right,
in length, and it's just beautifully, brilliantly, like the whole album, a lot of their albums of this era, but particularly this album, brilliantly paced, and I think that's what's important.
Yeah, and so after Rothery goes and does some amazing guitar work in the middle, you know, then Kelly comes in with his keys to kind of keep it moving along until they go back, another kind of time change, to go back to the acoustic bit again. I'm like, well, this is brilliant. This is wonderful music. I mean, yes, it's very long. They would never play this on American rock radio, but it's great. And then I like the way that it kind of plays out. But then I'm starting to wonder, okay, so I understand the story of Penelope. So how is that relating to Fish? Is it because he's isolated? You know, is he procrastinating, putting something off, like making a decision? Because that's kind of what it's about. Like, well, I'm just going to pull this apart so I don't have to do anything, so I don't have to choose tomorrow. Is it about, and then at the end, when he burns the shroud, is it, okay, I'm finally ready to move on? Is it about relationship? Are you now re-entering the world? Are you re-entering the dating world? I don't know. You can... That's what I think is brilliant about some of Fish's lyrics. Some of it's pretty straightforward, like maybe with Forgotten Sons, but some of it, you know, it is open to your own interpretation, and you can kind of meld it to whatever's going on in your life.
I think that's what makes music most brilliant. So I don't like talking about what my songs are about, because I see it's like when you read a book, you get an imagery in your head. When you watch a film, you're told what it is. And I like to leave my lyrics open to the interpretation of the listener. So I've got a view. It's my song when I write it and I record it. Once I release it, it's no longer mine. It becomes people's.
That's right.
And they're the ones who choose if it's a hit or not. It's not me. You know, they're the ones who like it and buy it. So again, on that sense, I do like that he leaves it open to the listener, from guys like my dad who heard it when it first came out in his early 20s to guys like yourselves who hear it at an older age from another culture, to myself who heard it at 6, 7, 8 years of age, taking it, you know what I mean? It can be adapted for the fact that you can have those 3 different age and era brackets.
Yep.
I think it's a testament to the song.
Yeah, absolutely. And I gave Steve Rothery big props here. We are lead guitar guys. We had Eddie Van Halen and Jimmy Page on our wall in college when we lived together, and didn't know who Steve Rothery was before I discovered Marillion. Actually, the first time I heard of Marillion was they used to have a Sunday night on MTV, like the British comedy strip. They would have Monty Python, they would have The Young Ones, and they would have the comic strip Presents. And I loved The Young Ones with Rick Mayall and Adrian Edmondson. And it was basically they were bored and they turned on the TV and then they start playing God Save the Queen, or they start playing out like it's time to go to bed, you spotty little kids, you know. And he's like, oh, not this song again. Play some Hawkwind or Marillion. And that's the only time I'd ever heard of Marillion in my life. Was Neil, the hippie, asking the TV to play Marillion.
Not this band again. They're always on. Crap. What about some Hawkwind or Marillion?
But Garden Party, starting off the second side. Now, this was the first single, and obviously they cut about 3 minutes out of it so they could make a single version and get it on, make a video. And I know I've already said this before, but to me, this is very Selling England by the pound to me. This is like very jabbing at British society quite a bit. It sounds quite a bit like Banks and Hackett together, not to mention Fish a little bit like Peter Gabriel, but they're taking the piss out of these people, right? I'm rucking, I'm fucking, you know. But the video's hilarious. Have you seen the video?
Yeah,
it's good stuff.
I was going to say for me, the video kind of it sold more what they were trying to do, and even though they're kind of making fun of British society, and you think you're better than I am, this one kind of resonates with the U.S. audience too, because it's that you're not better than I. No one's better than anyone else. We'll come and ruin your stupid party, and get under the table and put the salamanders or whatever on there, and just basically just ruin it because we can, and you're not better than we are. And I think like I said, the video really helps hammer home what they're trying to tell you in this one.
Yeah, no, I was going to say I agree with that exactly, and it's I think this is good for people listening on who don't quite understand what that Britishness is. The taking the piss culture is very, what would now be described as bants and banter and stuff like that is much more a thing, and if you look at shows like Fawlty Towers, completely out of those sort of people, you know, sort of tough type guys who are trying to be better than they are. And it's that ingrained it within the British culture is that sense of, you know, I'll take the mick out of you and do it in such a playful way. If you're one of those people taking the mick out of you, you're not going to know. You know, everyone else will know, but you're not going to know you're having the piss taken out of you because you just don't get it. And then that's what's quite clever. I don't know if that's an American sort of thing to do. You know, I feel like it's a bit more straightforward. If someone's taking the piss, you're going to know. Where here, it's a bit more in a way of, you know, everyone's going to get the joke but you.
Yeah, we do sarcasm. I mean, the British joke is Americans don't get sarcasm. So we just say, oh, no, we could never understand something as heightened as sarcasm. That would always just go over our heads. I think, though, that it's funny because I lived in St. John's Wood when I was in London, which is a pretty posh area. And I often don't get along with a lot of working class people in America, not because you're working class, but just because you're not smart necessarily, but you think you know everything. And that's the way I found posh British people. Like, they think they know everything and they're going to tell you because they're your betters. Whereas, like, with working class English people, I got along great. I'm like, these people are awesome. You know, they're cool, they're funny. They'll take the piss out of these, you know, like the old man who lived above me who either had a stick up his, you know what, or he didn't, and that was the real problem. So, you know, like, I can't deal with these, you know, people who think because they're upper class British, they have all the answers. I'm like, I don't get that. So that was kind of the part of my education. Like, it's being working class is pretty cool, I think, in Britain.
It's a badge of honor.
Yeah, it should be.
I'm from the north of England. It's a badge of honor to be from the north. You know, I'm from the north of England before I'm from England. You know, and there's a cultural divide between the north and the south for that reason.
Yep.
South don't give a shit. They want to come up here. They want to know about it. And the north know that's how they feel. So yeah, there's very much and again, Marillion being a northern band, you know, have that sense of and more so in the 80s too of this us against them. But yeah, you know, I'm proud to be northern. I'm proud to be a northerner first before I say I'm proud to be English.
I'm down with that. That's cool, man. That's awesome. All right, so past the garden party, which is a bit of the class war, you get to Chelsea Monday. And you were talking about this one a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
This is a story about a girl dreaming of a better, maybe a more glamorous life. It's kind of funny in that I think in the story they're kind of talking about, it's like she's a small town or provincial girl who's moved to Chelsea, and now she's trying to find her way into higher society. Nowadays, if you move to Chelsea, you're already in higher society, man. I couldn't have afforded to live in Chelsea, and I lived in a pretty nice place, but
can't afford to fight in Chelsea.
No, I mean that's way too nice. So I mean, I think that the early 80s, late 70s that Fish came out of when they may have written this song, London's a lot different today than it was then. But it's kind of the old story, I mean, of a girl, maybe a small town girl, dreams of making it into the big city, and maybe things don't work out. That's a pretty universal tale that we're all familiar with in America. A lot of songs about this kind of thing. But
oh yeah, and I think the phrase "it's just another Chelsea Monday" can be applicable. And you know, I mean, I know when I moved into Sheffield in the north, I'd been living in Australia, moved here, didn't really know anyone. I could just come back. It's like middle of the pandemic. So the idea of searching after trying to get the music back on you know, maybe pick up where I left off sort of thing before the pandemic. So the idea of it just being another Chelsea Monday would be applicable to being another Sheffield Monday, you know, where everything's rolling through. You're trying to get your feet on the ground and get these things happening, you know, get onto shows like this. But as you're trying to do that, it's just ultimately yet another, the view's the same out the window. You know, it's just another Sheffield or Chelsea Monday. So lyrically, one of my favourites, probably of all time songs, I think I would dare say.
Wow.
Yeah, I think the guitar solo is beautifully emotive. The lyrics, as I said, applicable to anyone. And if you're not paying attention, the song's not ended when you think it has.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, a song that definitely I will find a way to tie into my music somewhere if I can. I just think it's one of those brilliant all-round songs that, in my eye, should have been a single, but maybe that comes from the guitar lover in me.
Well, yeah. Well, you know, it's again, it's hard to have an 8-minute single. You have to slice some of this stuff out of there, you know. But you're right. And then at the end, where there's kind of, it's like a spoken word thing, where it's like someone on the street talking about, they just fished her out of the old father, which I guess would be the Thames. So did she commit suicide? Did she find the wrong guy who she was trying to make her life better, and that's where she ended up? Did she have to become a prostitute to live in the big city, and that's just one of the pitfalls of it? I don't know. Again, and if you're not listening closely, because that's not a sung part of the song, right? It's not like the chord. You're not like following the story that you might miss some of that. Again, that's again open to interpretation, but it sounds like she died. And again, just another Chelsea Monday. There'll be another one off the bus or off the train, you know, from a small town here any minute to take her place, right?
Yeah, you know, and the line that, you know, they fish out that she was smiling as if it was a long time. But you're right, it is that same thing. The next day is just another Chelsea Monday, you know, or Monday in Chelsea, however you want to see it. But yeah, no, a very subtle song. And that, as I said, that spoken word bit, I'll be nicked really from the idea for Outside. I thought it was brilliant, that idea, and very innovative, I think, of the time. I can't think of very many songs of that era anyway, particularly that thing, and we're doing that sort of cross-conversation. Pink Floyd, I suppose, were doing it with, you know, Dark Side of the Moon and stuff like that. But, you know, it's very, it definitely an album, I think, that probably shaped a lot more albums that came out of England after that than I think people probably realise, you know, with some of the ideas, very, very, you know, unique ideas that just weren't being done.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting take. Yeah, definitely. Well, it's a classic one for them. I mean, look, there's for our American fans who might say, you know, should I start with Script for a Jester's Tear? How do I get into Marillion? They, like Van Halen, have a best of collection, a 2 CD set called Best of Both Worlds. And the first one is the Fish era when he's singing, and the second one is the Hogarth era. And I picked it up during the pandemic. I'm like, all right, well, I got to learn more about this band Marillion, and I thought, well, this is a brilliant way to do it. But more than half the songs from this record are on that. So if you want to start with this, well, you can. Obviously, you can do it on a streaming service, but go check out Best of Both Worlds, because it'll have most of this, and it'll have all the Fish era greatness, but then you can also see what they did later on as well.
Yeah.
Time's moving on us here, so let's get to Forgotten Sons, the last song on the record. And this is about the Troubles in Northern Ireland. And I'd be curious on your take on this. It's all about perception, right? I mean, we celebrate the Boston Tea Party, where Americans in the 1770s jumped on a ship and threw all their tea overboard. Well, in the British paper, it was probably terrorists attacked our tea, you know, whereas here, like, freedom fighters fought back against the oppressive British. So it's all kind of depends on, you know, your perception and where you are there. But I think the song is very poignant, and there's a lot going on in this song. I think it's very well written by Fish, and versus, again, it's another song that came out in 1983, Sunday Bloody Sunday by U2, you know, kind of is talking about this same thing. That's more up in your face. It's called Sunday Bloody Sunday. You understand what that's about. This is more about how, yeah, there's a war, but aren't you forgetting there's sons on both sides that we're losing. They're not just grist for the mill. There's a dad who is drinking his way through the news because he's worried about his son, and there's a mom who's worried about this. Some of the lyrics are brilliant. You're just another coffin on its way down the Emerald Isle. AILSLE, you know, instead of versus ISLE, you know, it's very good stuff. From the dole queue to the regiment, a profession in a flash, because, like, oh, you need a job? Yeah, here, go fight and lose your life for this cause that you may or may not believe in. Like, this is, in a way, it's a lot more poignant, even more than Sunday Bloody Sunday. It's just maybe a little less accessible.
Well, I was going to say that I think that's the problem with this music and this song to begin with. It, you know, Sunday Bloody Sunday is very, it's got the chorus, it's got the, you know, it's more of a sing-along song. This is very dense. I mean, I know there is no chorus in this song at all. He does mention Forgotten Sons a couple of times, but there isn't that sing-along anthem to this, even though it's a really heavy-duty topic, and they do make some really good points in it. It's just very, very dense.
My brain shall scream.
has a poignant end to it as well. Like, as a final track of a record, a few hours ago I was listening through to it. It ends. It's done. There's no big ending. There's no drawn out massiveness to it. It is forgotten songs, bang, done, album over. And I sort of stopped and went, oh shit, okay, that's right, that's right, you know.
That's right.
But yeah, no, definitely a song that, again, lyrically changed a few things, probably resonating with various people still today.
Unfortunately.
Which is why I think this album is probably one of those albums that I think people would say have been inspired by more still now than they realised. You know, one of those bands that don't probably get their dues for it.
Yeah, they were probably ahead of their time, even though they were seen as kind of like behind, I guess, because in '83, like we talked about before, Genesis had left this behind a while ago.
Even Queen had left it behind. You know, their early 70s records were very similar in vein and style, but by '83 they'd gone down the synth pop route.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, you get.
That's what I would say. Yeah, if they come out in 1973, it probably would have fit in, but probably viewed in a different light.
Yep, right. Exactly.
Yeah, that's exactly my note here. Right. Only I put 76. Like, if this had come out in 76, you know, when Hackett was still in Genesis, and Yes, we're still kind of going through their kind of epic stage. I'm like, this Marillion would be put right up there. But because it came out in '83 when Duran Duran was the big, you know, British act, especially here in America, and I realize you didn't have MTV. We're really children of the MTV generation. But like we talked to our buddy Neil on Def Leppard Pod, which is probably the best Def Leppard podcast out there. It's like, we didn't even get MTV till like 1989 or something like that. And so it's like you could watch Top of the Pops and then maybe they show a few videos on there and maybe there was like a Friday night show or something like that. But like, that's it. They didn't have that 24-hour thing where we would just be glued there. What's on next kind of thing. And that's how we all got our music back in the 80s. You know, whereas, you know, it was different in your culture there. So you had to go hunt something like this down. But I feel like if you did, you'd be rewarded.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's probably sort of culturally a bit the same here now where, you know, I'm also trying to get over to the States for a first tour at the moment because everyone's saying, oh, you can land anywhere and probably pick up a show. We don't need booking. Like, there's just that culture and the music that's going on where here it's still very much, it's a slightly more guarded culture. You know, I always say in England, it's not very trendy to say you like a band. Where I find like you Americans with my own music are much more forthcoming in, oh, I was listening to a record today while driving. It's just as a message just to let me know, you know, where over here it would be considered maybe a bit lame or something to reach out with a message like that. So, you know, culturally, it's culture. I think there's still that sort of, it's a different way of accessing music or speaking about the music that you like.
So are you planning a US tour?
I am, yeah. So I've been doing a lot of records been selling in America recently, like the singles as well, not the streaming, which would be nice to get out in New York. So it seems to be the East Coast. They seem to quite like me, which is nice. So hopefully I work my way down the Big Apple and down and around. I mean, I just love to get there and just soak up the musical culture of America as much as anything. But yeah, I don't quite know. They seem to find me quite interesting, the Americans. So we'll see what happens when I land there, thusly. But yeah, no, it's funny. For years I couldn't break America at all, no matter how much I tried. And then I kind of gave up and went, all right, then, well. And then you guys sort of found me, particularly out of Texas originally. And it's just
in Texas.
You do real well in Austin. Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's what I've been told. So yeah, keep the city centre as well, I'm told. But yeah, no, you know, and it's just grown from there. Not so much like sort of West Coast yet. It's probably a saturated market, really. But yeah, the East Coast, definitely. They, I don't quite know how they're finding it, but they're definitely finding it. So as long as they keep selling, yes, fingers crossed, if we keep buying the records.
So speaking of that, where can we find you?
Everywhere, really. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, even YouTube, Bandcamp, Spotify, and Jimmy Madden, Maddon. If you search me, and you'll find me. And then, yeah, you can catch all the back catalogue of singles and albums. And then, yeah, as I said, touring around England. So I'm in Nottingham tonight, or whenever this maybe gets viewed by someone in Nottingham in your past.
Yes.
And, yeah, I think Lincoln as well, tomorrow I move back into Sheffield. So, and then, yeah, the States. So, you know, I'm really working with people there now to... as I said, it's still the mecca of it. It's the place you got to make it. And I don't know if it's quite fortunate that I've got, you know, everyone's trying to force their way into America, and America sort of found me. organically, whether that bodes well. But yeah, it's funny. I didn't quite know what to make of a record when I first started doing well. But as I said, the culture of letting me know that you like me is it's brilliant. But whether I don't know if everyone quite understands what I'm on about half the time.
Well, that's all right, and we wish you the best of luck in England, in Europe, in Australia, around the world. But yeah, coming to America, please keep us informed of what you're up to and when you're coming. I mean, we're kind of in the big bit in the middle. Mick Jagger always likes to say, well, there's the bits on the edges. And he's talking about like New York and LA. He's like, and they always get the music, but there's the big bit in the middle you have to kind of go out and conquer. And there's little spots here and there. Gary mentioned Austin. I bet in Nashville you would love it there. There's usually in Ohio, like Cleveland and Cincinnati and Columbus, very rock and roll friendly kind of place. But there's some other places that you might have to trudge up there and try to win them over. So we wish you all the best, and we thank you for coming on and give us a little education about Marillion today. I think that our listeners, if they would take the time to explore, it might take a minute, but I think they would appreciate what's going on with them.
No, thank you. So absolutely. I think, as I said, the band I love, band I got up listening to. I'm sure my dad will enjoy listening back to this podcast. And as an actual, you probably should have had him on, really. You know what I mean? He grew up listening to
Maybe one day.
Yeah. But yeah, as I said, a band that's definitely shaped tracks on the first album, probably really the second album. So yeah, a band I love. But thanks very much for having me on as well, guys. It's been much appreciated.
No, great to meet you, Jimmy. Thanks for everything. And yeah, all the best to you in your music and career, man.
Thank you. Namaste.
That was a fun interview, man.
I'll tell you what. I didn't know what to expect because this dude was a rock star and doing his own stuff. He was a really cool dude to talk to.
Yeah.
And cool that it wasn't all about, he did bring it back to his music, but more like as a fan and not like when I write a song, here's what whatever. No, he was a really cool guy. I think he's a guy we could have on again if we wanted to talk, especially about Queen or something like
definitely.
that. That would be cool. Because that's another band too that really never. I know they had "We Will Rock You," but they never really caught on in the United States like they did in England.
They were super popular. They definitely sold a lot of records over here, and they had some big hits. But you're right; it doesn't mean the same.
Right. Yeah.
Queen in the U.S. versus England, and even if you watch the movie Bohemian Rhapsody, I remember when Queen came on. I was watching it live back in the day. They really did go nuts in Wembley for that. If they had played Philadelphia, sure, people would have loved it, but it wouldn't have been the same reaction, Correct. And that's why certain bands played in London and certain bands played in Philly, So, talented guy, Jimmy. I'm glad to hear that he's coming to the U.S., or at least trying to. I'm glad to hear that his music is selling here. We connected with him over social media, so he is on Instagram. He's got a YouTube channel where you can see and hear from Jimmy there, and it's not just his performances. Sometimes it's kind of what he's up to that day, maybe going to a gig or whatever. Enjoyable conversation, and I'm glad that we had someone who understands British culture and music to kind of get us into Marillion, because again, other than hearing Neil on the Young Ones screaming, "Oh, play some Hawkwind and Marillion," that was the first time I'd heard of them, and the first time I heard them was decades after that. And I've heard a lot of rock and roll over my years, so if I don't know anything about them, then the average rock fan I know doesn't know much about them. So if we can shine a little bit of a light on them for the American audience, I think that's a good thing.
Right. And especially a band like we were talking about before, where it's beneficial. They did have singles, but you need to listen to the whole record as it was intended, start to finish. And
absolutely
listen to the full, not the 4-minute and 13-second track, the full 8:40 or however they put it together.
And check them out on YouTube. If you see like an early 80s or early to mid 80s Marillion concert with Fish as their lead singer, you might have to ignore his hair or lack thereof, because sometimes his hair is just awful. It's like it's obvious he's losing it. That's okay. It happens to all of us. And just look at the performance. Look at the way he moves around on stage. He's got the makeup on. He's got the outfits on. And he's giving a performance.
Right.
To the backdrop of this incredible musicianship, especially by Steve Rothery, who I know guitar people love him in England. American guitar fans are usually more blues or metal based, but I think you'll really appreciate him. Plus, you put in Pete Trewavas on the bass is brilliant, and Mark Kelly on the keys. They all just make this really fantastic music together, and it's obviously worked because on that score, they haven't had a lineup change in more than 40 years.
Right. And that leads to a cohesiveness that you have to have when you play music like that. You can't be swapping people in and out and have it be as tight as what they come up with.
Well, folks, that is our discussion of Marillion's A Script for a Jester's Tear with Jimmy Madden, young up-and-coming musician who's a great guy and very well-versed in prog. And Marillion certainly grew up listening to it with his dad, which is great to hear. And he's out there touring right now, folks. He's released some records. Go to jimmymadden.com. I think you'll like his artwork, especially you Queen fans. We'll see a little something there that maybe looks familiar, but his music is cool, and we hope to see him in the United States here before too long. Really appreciate his take on it. Just another band that, for whatever reason, very English, and they resonated well with the English rock music fan, certainly the prog rock fan, even though they came up during a time where prog was very out. And I don't know how popular prog was generally, but by the time you're in that early to mid 80s, when it's all very new wave and glossy MTV, that wasn't going to happen in America. No matter how great the songs were, no matter how great the musicians were, it just wasn't going to fly in America. But they did find their foothold in England. Glad they did. Haven't had a whole lot of turnover in their band, so they've been very steady. Had some great output over the years. I don't know how many other Marillion records we might do, but like I said, for you US fans, maybe check out Best of Both Worlds. Definitely check out this Script for a Jester's Tear, and by all means, go to jimmymadden.com. Go follow him on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or whatever. He's always good about reaching out to his fans, letting them know what he's up to and what he's playing, when he's playing, where he's playing, all that kind of stuff. So thank you, Jimmy, so much. We appreciate it. We hope to see you stateside here sometime real soon. And with that, folks, as usual, we want to know, did we get something right? Did we get something wrong? Did we miss the point? Did we leave out your favorite part? You got to let us know. You email us. It's uglyamericanwerewolf@gmail.com. You can also tweet or DM us at ugly_werewolf or at actionjack72. Let us know about the albums, the bands, the concerts, the DVDs, the rock properties you want us to know about. And as always, thank you to Pantheon Pods, as we are a proud member of Pantheon Podcast. And special thanks to RareVinyl.com for sponsoring us. Look, you want to get some of that original artwork in pristine condition from first edition Marillion releases, go to RareVinyl.com. Use code PODCAST. Save yourself 10% on your orders. Next week, Jackson and I are looking to get back together stateside. Now that I've been here for a month, I've been trying to get settled here in my Midwestern hometown. I'm going to go see Jackson down in Florida, and hopefully we get to hang out and maybe make another show, maybe make a couple of shows, maybe just have a little bit of fun. But that'll be coming to you here very soon on the Ugly American Werewolf. So as always, look, please download and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you're thinking about it, please give us a positive review, because that just helps us find more rock and roll fans like you around the world. And until next time, to all of you rock and rollers all around the world, be cool and stay safe.